"Come home," said the silent trapper the second she stepped off the wrong coach. The coach was already moving when I saw her. I'd come down from the high country for salt and lamp oil, the way I did 4 times a year, and I was standing at the edge of the road outside Calder's trading post with my pack mule tied to the post, and a list in my coat pocket I'd already memorized. The deadfall stage came through at mid-morning on Tuesdays, always late, always loud, always trailing a cloud of alkaline dust that you could taste on the back of your teeth for an hour after it passed. I had no interest in who got on or off. I had salt to buy, and a 3-day climb back to the cabin before the first serious cold came down off the ridgeline. She was the only one who stepped down. That was the first wrong thing. Nobody got off at Calder's unless they lived within a day's ride, and I knew everybody who lived within a day's ride. There were 9 of them, counting the 2 Haverson boys who were barely old enough to count. She was not one of them. The second wrong thing was the look on her face when the coach pulled away. Not grief, not fear exactly. More like a person standing in a room that was supposed to be her room, that had her name on the door, that turned out to have the wrong furniture in it. She stood there with a carpet bag in one hand and a smaller leather case in the other, and she looked at the trading post, and she looked at the empty road, and she looked at the mountains behind me, and none of it matched whatever she had in her head. I should have walked into Calder's. I had a list. I had 3 days of climbing ahead of me. I had been alone in the high country for 11 years, and I knew how to stay out of things that were not my concern. I walked over to her. She heard my boots in the gravel and turned, and I saw she was maybe 30, maybe a little over, with dark hair coming loose from under a travel hat and eyes that were doing an extremely careful job of not showing how alarmed she was. She had the kind of jaw you see on people who have decided, a long time ago, that they are not going to let the world see them buckle. I said, "Where were you trying to get to?" She said, "Millhaven." Millhaven was 140 miles east and south. It was on a different stage line entirely. You got there out of Kearney, not out of the junction at Forks. Somebody had sold her the wrong ticket, or she had bought it wrong, or the man at the junction had put her on the wrong coach, and now she was here instead of there, and the next eastbound coach through Calder's did not come for 6 days. I told her that. She received this information the way a person receives a punch they half expected, not collapsing, just absorbing it, standing a little straighter maybe than she had been before. 6 days, she said. 6 days. She looked at the trading post. Is there a hotel? No. A boarding house? No. Somewhere I could. Calder has a back room, I said. He rents it sometimes, mostly to hunters. It's not clean. She looked at the trading post again, deciding something. Then she looked at me. I don't know what she saw. A big man with a beard who hadn't been to a barber since spring, wearing canvas work clothes and a coat that had been repaired in 4 places, with a mule behind him that was chewing on something it had found in the dirt. Not reassuring, probably. "Do you know Millhaven?" she asked. "Been through it twice. I'm meant to take a teaching position there, September 1st. September 1st was 8 days out. You'll make it, I said, if the next coach runs on time. She nodded once, and I could see her doing arithmetic in her head, the kind of arithmetic that has money in it and not enough of it. I'd seen that calculation before. My mother used to run it every fall before the first snow. I said, "Come inside. I'll talk to Calder about the room." Calder was a big soft man who smelled like the lard he used to waterproof harness leather, and he was not a bad person exactly, but he was the kind of man who priced things at whatever the traffic would bear, and a stranded woman with a carpet bag was going to bear a good deal in his estimation. I knew that before I walked through the door, so I made sure I walked through first. I told him I was sending a friend to use the back room for 6 days, and that we had agreed on a reasonable price, and I said a number that was not generous but was not robbery, and Calder looked at the woman behind me and looked at me, and understood the situation well enough to nod. She heard this and caught my arm in the doorway, not grabbing, just a touch. "I don't know your name," she said. "Josiah Cray." "Nora Alcott," she paused. "I can pay for the room myself." "I know. I'm not asking for charity." It wasn't charity. It was Calder getting a fair price instead of what he was planning to get. I looked at her straight. "You'd have figured it out yourself in about 10 minutes. I just saved us both the trouble." She held my eyes for a moment. Then something in her jaw shifted very slightly and she said, "All right. Thank you, Mr. Cray." I got my salt and my lamp oil. I added flour to the list and dried beans and a half-pound of tobacco, and I spent an extra 20 minutes in the store that I hadn't planned on. Calder showed Nora Alcott the back room and I heard her voice, careful and even, asking about water and about whether there was a lock on the door. Calder's answers were shorter than they should have been. I left before I finished loading the mule. I was 3 miles up the first switchback when I stopped and sat on a rock and looked down at Calder's roof below me, just visible through the aspens. 6 days. 6 days was not a long time. She would manage. She was not a woman who was going to fold up in a back room in a trading post. I could see that from 10 minutes with her. She had a jaw like a closed door and eyes that were measuring everything, and she was going to be fine. I sat on that rock for a while. Then I went back down. I told Calder I'd be camping at the south pasture for a few days, working a trap line there, which was not entirely untrue. I did have 3 traps set in that drainage, and I did need to check them. I set up a camp at the edge of the tree line where I could see the road and the post without being visible from either. I built a small fire and cooked a plain meal and told myself I was there for the traps. The second morning I heard raised voices from the direction of the post. There were 3 men who came through Calder's semi-regularly, riding a loose circuit between the mining camps and not doing anything in particular that you could point to. Vance Heller was the one who did the talking, which meant he was the one to watch. He had a way of laughing at the thing he just said, before you'd had a chance to respond, that was designed to make you feel slow. His 2 companions were large and quiet in the way that large, quiet men are sometimes quiet because they're waiting. By the time I came out of the trees, they were standing in the road in front of the post, and Nora Alcott was standing in the doorway, and the conversation had been going on long enough that her chin was up. I came around the corner of the building from the side, so I was behind Heller and his men before they heard me. "Morning," I said. Heller turned. He knew me not well but enough. There had been a previous occasion, 3 years back, involving a man who'd accused me of poaching his traps. Heller had watched that occasion from a respectable distance and drawn his conclusions. "Cray," he said, "didn't know you were down from the mountain." "Checking traps," I said. I was looking at Nora, not at Heller, and she was looking at me with an expression that was not quite relief but was close to it. The look of a woman who has been holding a position alone and can see reinforcements arriving. "Miss Alcott, ready for breakfast?" She came down the step without hesitating. "I am," she said, and walked directly to me and stood at my side, and the 3 men in the road found themselves looking at the 2 of us together, and whatever arithmetic Heller had been running came up with a different answer than it had before. He touched his hat brim and moved on. His companions followed. Nora said nothing until they were out of sight. Then she let a slow breath out through her nose. "They came yesterday too," she said. "I know, I saw." She looked at me. "You've been camped out there." It wasn't a question exactly. "Trap line," I said. "Yes," she said, with a tone that meant she was filing that away to look at later. "Well, thank you for the timing. You want breakfast or not?" "I want breakfast." We ate at Calder's counter on stools, and she told me about Millhaven without me asking. She'd been a teacher in Ohio for 4 years, she said, and when the position had come up she'd answered the advertisement, and they'd answered back and here she was. Or here she wasn't, which was the problem. She said it with a dry humor that sat in the corners of her mouth, and I found I liked it. I don't talk much. I haven't for years. It's not that I'm incapable of it. It's that I spent enough time around men who talked for the sake of hearing themselves that I concluded silence was generally the more honest position. But there was something in the way she talked economical, a little wry, not requiring me to perform enthusiasm I didn't feel that made it easy. She didn't fill silences the way some people do, like they're afraid of them. She let them sit. I told her about the high country, some of it anyway. I told her about the cabin and the trap line and the seasons up there, how the winters ran long and hard and how the springs, when they came all at once in a way that seemed impossible if you hadn't seen it before. She listened and asked the right questions, which mostly meant she asked the specific ones and not the general ones, not what's it like, but how long does the snow stay on the north-facing slopes, that kind of thing. After a while she said, "You've been up there alone 11 years. Near enough. That's a long time." It is. She didn't say anything else about it, didn't pity it or admire it or find it romantic, just received it as information. I appreciated that more than I could have explained. The third day the weather turned. I'd felt it coming, that particular drop in the air pressure that the hair on your forearms registers before your brain does, the way the light goes flat and gray on the underside of the cloud bank moving in from the northwest. By noon it was raining hard, and by mid-afternoon it was something between rain and sleet, and the temperature was going down fast. This was too early for real winter, but the high country didn't always care about calendar. I had traps up there that would need pulling before the real cold set in. I had a cabin that was provisioned but not for a long absence. I needed to go up. But the roads east would be impassable for at least 2 days. The stage, when it came, if it came on schedule, would come through mud that would take half the day off its speed, and there was no certainty it would come at all if the pass filled up with early snow. I went to Calder's and knocked on the back room door. She opened it after a moment, and I could see she'd been grading papers. She had a stack of what looked like completed lesson plans spread across the room's single table, red pencil in hand, and the lamp was burning. It smelled like paper and lamp oil and something else, something that might have been violet water or might have been soap. "The east road's likely to be rough," I said. "The stage might be delayed." She looked at me. Then she looked past me at the window where the sleet was visible against the glass. "How rough?" "A day, maybe 2 past schedule. Maybe not, hard to say." She considered this. "And you need to go up to your trap line." I hadn't said that. "Yes." "Before the snow closes things off." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the papers on the table. "Is there any way through to Millhaven that doesn't depend on the stage?" There was. It was longer and harder, and it involved getting over the Larkspur Saddle before the snow got serious, and then dropping down into the eastern drainage through country that was not difficult if you knew it, and was very difficult if you didn't. It was not a route you put an unfamiliar woman on alone. "There's a route," I said, "through the high country. Comes out east of Millhaven, close enough." "You know it." "I've run it in fall before. Takes 3 days from the summit." She was looking at me very directly. "Are you offering to take me?" I thought about how I'd answered that question to myself for the last 3 days, sitting at a fire I hadn't planned on building, watching a road I hadn't planned on watching. "Yes," I said. She looked down at the table for a moment, at the papers, then she straightened up. "When would we need to leave?" "Tomorrow morning, early." "I'll be ready," she said. I went back to my camp and checked my gear, and added to it what I'd need for a 3-person operation, myself, her, and the mule, who I'd already been running harder than I liked. I had a second bedroll in my pack that I'd brought without quite deciding why, and I untied it now and checked it over in the firelight, and the only thought I let myself have about that was a practical one, which was that she was going to need it. The rain hammered the canvas over my head all night. I slept anyway, the way you learn to sleep in the mountains, not deep, exactly, but restorative. Something in the body that knows how to rest without letting go entirely. Before it was light, I broke camp and led the mule back down to the post. She was already outside. She had her carpet bag packed and the leather case tied to it, and she'd added something, a pair of boots that were better for walking than the ones she'd arrived in. Calder's store, probably. She was wearing a heavier coat, too. She'd spent the days getting ready quietly, without telling me. "You bought boots," I said. "I had the feeling I'd need them," she said. I tied her bags to the mule's near side, balancing them against my packs, and I thought about the fact that she'd been preparing for this since before I'd knocked on her door. Maybe since the first morning, when she'd looked at the mountains behind me and done her arithmetic. We said nothing else. We started walking. The first day was the valley floor and the approach to the lower timber, and it was wet and cold, and the mule was temperamental about the mud, the way mules are, digging in every fourth step for no reason I could diagnose. Nora walked behind and slightly to the side where she wouldn't catch his tail if he decided to use it. She matched my pace without complaint. By noon we were into the timber and out of the worst of the wind, and I called a halt at a stream crossing where the water was fast but shallow enough. I got the mule across and came back for her bags without being asked, and she crossed on her own, stepping rock to rock with a deliberateness that kept her boots dry. We ate at midday standing up, dried meat and hardtack and cold water from the stream, and she ate all of it without comment, which told me something. In the afternoon, the timber thickened and the trail narrowed, and I had to lead the mule single file, and she was close enough behind that I could occasionally hear her breathing. Not labored, just present. I found it, I don't know. There's something about the sound of another person's breathing in quiet country that you forget after long enough alone that you've missed. We made 7 miles before I called a stop at a ledge with overhang enough to keep the worst of the weather off. I strung a canvas between 2 pines for additional cover and got a fire going in the driest corner I could find. She set up the bedrolls without instruction, having watched me unpack them once, and placed them correctly, close enough to the fire's warmth, far enough from the sparks. She was practical. I kept noticing that. Practical in the way of someone who has had to be, not the way of someone performing competence. We ate. I made coffee that was too strong, which was the only kind I knew how to make, and she drank it without complaint, and after a moment said it was good, which I did not believe but appreciated. The fire snapped and settled. After a while she said, "Were you always a trapper?" "No." She waited. "I was a deputy for a while. Before that I was a soldier." "Where?" I said the name of the territory. She received it without drama. People who'd been through the war knew enough to receive those names quietly. "And then you went to the mountains," she said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. The fire popped. The rain had eased to a drizzle that hissed in the pines. "Were you married?" she asked, direct but not unkind. She had that ability, to ask a direct question and make it feel like concern, rather than prying. "I was." She waited again. I decided to go the rest of the way. "She died in '68 fever. We had a daughter who was 2 months old." I looked at the fire. "The daughter went to my wife's sister in Pennsylvania." "I'm sorry," Nora said. Just those 2 words, plain and level, not cushioned or extended. "Long time ago," I said. "It doesn't always feel long." I looked at her. She was looking at the fire. Her hands were folded in her lap, and there was something in the set of her shoulders that suggested she knew something about that from the inside, not the outside. I didn't ask. It wasn't my place yet. We slept, each in our own bedroll, with a foot of space between us and the fire in front. I woke twice in the night, once to add wood, once because a branch fell somewhere upslope and the mule moved. Both times she was still. Both times I thought about how long it had been since I'd shared a fire with anyone. The second day was harder. The trail went up through a section of broken talus that I knew but that read badly in wet weather, where the footing looked solid and was often not. The mule hated it. I spent an hour picking a line across that I was confident in, and another hour convincing the mule that I was right and he was wrong, which he never fully conceded. Nora waited on solid ground and watched without offering help or commentary. When I finally got the mule across and turned to see how she'd do, she crossed in about 4 minutes, choosing each step with the precision of someone who has been watching where to put her feet for the past hour. I said, "Good." She said, "Thank you," and kept walking. The pass came in mid-afternoon, and with it, the last of the weather. The cloud ceiling broke west of the summit, and by the time we crested the Larkspur Saddle, the eastern sky was clear and cold and gold, the way high country skies go in late afternoon when a front passes. Below us, maybe 12 miles by line of sight, the land flattened out into the valley drainage that ran eventually to Millhaven. She stopped next to me on the saddle and looked out at it. I don't know what she saw. I saw the route, the drainage south of the ridge, the ford at the canyon mouth, the long flat stretch through the sage. I'd done it in a day and a half once in a hurry, and I could do it in 2 easy. We had 2 days. "It's beautiful," she said, and then she said it again, quieter, more to herself than to me. "It's beautiful." It was. I'd stopped letting myself think so, living in it, the way you stop noticing things that are always there. But standing on the saddle with someone beside me who was seeing it for the first time, I saw it again too, briefly, the scale of it, the way the ranges layered blue and darker blue toward the horizon, the evening light going amber on the canyon walls below. She stood there a full minute before she turned away. The descent was steep and the footing was loose shale for the first 1,000 feet, and I put her hand on the mule's lead rope and told her to let him balance her on the bad sections, which a good mule will do on ground he's been over before. This mule had, and he did. She figured it out fast. We camped at the canyon mouth, beside the ford. The stream was fast from the recent rain but manageable. I made a better dinner than the first night. I'd carried a small iron pan and had bacon and meal, and the coffee was still too strong, but I'd been told it was good once, so I decided that was the calibration. She was tired. I could see it, not complaint, just the honest tiredness of a hard day on terrain that works muscles you don't know you have until they object. She ate everything and put her coffee cup down and leaned against the pack. I'd propped against a boulder and closed her eyes. I sat with my own cup and watched the fire and listened to the stream. After a while she said, eyes still closed, "Josiah." First time she'd used my name. I said, "Why did you come back down the mountain?" I looked at the fire. "Trap line," I said. "Is that the whole answer?" "It wasn't, we both knew it wasn't. You were alone," I said, "and Calder's is Calder's." "I could have managed." "I know." Silence, the fire, the stream. "I'm glad you came back anyway," she said. She fell asleep before I answered, which was fine because I didn't have an answer that was properly formed. I had something that was more feeling than words, a sense of having done the right thing for the first time in a long while, of being in the right place, of a weight somewhere in my chest that had been there so long I'd stopped noticing it beginning, very slightly, to ease. The third day was easy walking, long and flat through the sage, with the mountains behind us throwing long shadows across the plain in the morning, and the sun climbing clear into a sky that had gone from cold to merely cool. The mule walked well. We walked well. We talked more than we had. She told me about Ohio, the particular school where she'd taught, a girl she'd had 2 years running who'd been the sharpest student she'd ever seen, the way that kind of sharpness felt like a responsibility as much as a pleasure. She talked about teaching with the same matter-of-fact care that she brought to everything else, not as a calling she was performing, just as a thing she was genuinely good at and knew she was good at. I told her about the cabin, more than I'd told anyone in years probably. The way it was built, I'd built it myself over 2 falls, the way the window faced east so the morning light came in right, the way the spring ran clean 30 feet from the door. I caught myself describing it the way you describe a place you want someone to see, and then I caught myself noticing I was doing that, and I kept talking anyway. Around noon she said, "You could leave." "What?" "The mountain if you wanted, you could leave." "I know." She was quiet for a stride or two. "You don't want to." "I don't know what I want," I said, which was more honest than I'd meant to be. "I know what I'm used to." She accepted that without pushing it. We stopped for water at midday beside a low creek, and I knelt to fill the canteen, and when I stood, she was looking at me with a directness that was different from her usual directness, more open, less measured, like she'd decided to let me see something. "Millhaven is," she started. "80 miles south of the high country," I said. She held my eyes. I was going to say it's a small town, room for a school and not much else. "Most places out here are." "A person could get provisions in Millhaven," she said. "Someone coming through on a supply run would find it convenient." My chest did something I'd forgotten it could do. "Would they?" I said. "I'd think so." She picked up her bag. "I don't know the country around there. Someone who did might find it worth knowing." She started walking. I looked at the creek for a moment, at the water running fast and cold over the stones, and then I picked up the mule's lead and followed her. We saw the rooftops of Millhaven in mid-afternoon. Small as advertised, a main street with maybe 12 buildings on it. A school at the east end that I could see from a mile out, white clapboard, with a bell tower that needed paint. She saw it too, and I saw her see it, her chin lifting slightly, her pace changing, not faster exactly but more settled, like something in her body that had been held in careful suspension for the last week finally setting its feet. We walked in on the main street and people looked at us the way they look at strangers, not unfriendly, just measuring. A woman with a market basket, a man outside the livery who raised a hand, a boy of maybe 8 who stared at the mule without trying to hide it. She stopped outside what turned out to be the town's single hotel, more of a rooming house, really, 2 stories and a porch with 3 chairs on it, and turned to face me. "Well," she said. "Well," I said. She looked at me for a moment with that open look she'd had at the creek, and then she did something I hadn't expected. She stepped close and put both hands on my forearms, the way you'd hold someone you've been through something with, and she looked up at me and said, "You could have left me in Calder's." "Yes." "You went back down the mountain." "Yes." "I want you to know that I know what that means," she said. "The going back, I know what it cost you." I didn't say anything. She was right, she knew what it meant, and she knew I knew she knew, and there wasn't anything to add to that. She stood there for a moment with her hands on my arms and her eyes level with my chin, looking up at me, and I thought that this precise moment, the weight of her hands on my arms, the afternoon light on the white clapboard of the hotel, the smell of sage still on both our clothes, was the kind of thing that should be remembered, was going to be remembered, by me, for a long time. Then she said, "Come back." Just that. Come back, when you've put your traps up and laid in your winter stores and done what you need to do up there. Come back and tell me how the mountain looks when the snow is on it. She paused. "I'll want to know." I had things I could have said. I said one thing instead, "All right." She smiled, small, genuine, just at the corners of her mouth, the way a real smile is when a person doesn't perform them. Then she stepped back, picked up her carpet bag and walked into the hotel. I stood outside for a minute, maybe 2. The mule bumped the back of my shoulder with his nose, because he wanted to find water and I was standing between him and the likely location of it. "All right," I said to him, the same word I just said to her, and we went to find the livery. I stayed 3 days in Millhaven. I told myself it was the mule that needed the rest. The mule probably would have agreed if he'd been consulted. The second evening she showed me the school. She had a key. The school board had come to see her at the hotel within an hour of her arrival, and there had been some discussion, she said, about the lateness and the unorthodox route, and she had handled it the way I was coming to understand she handled everything, which was with patience and clarity and a certain firmness that foreclosed the need for drama. She unlocked the schoolhouse door, and it smelled like pine and chalk, and the particular dusty smell of books that have been in a closed room for a summer. She walked the room the way a person walks a house they're going to make their own, stopping here, measuring with her eye there, standing at the window that looked east and was going to get good morning light. "The students start Monday," she said. "That's 4 days." "Yes," she ran her hand along the top of the desk at the front of the room. "I have work to do." I stayed another day after that. I helped her move a bookcase from the storage room at the back to the side wall of the classroom, because it took 2 people, and she wasn't going to ask the school board members, and she wasn't going to let it defeat her. We moved it together, which was harder than it sounds because the storage room door was narrow, and the bookcase was solid walnut, and had been built by someone who cared more about permanence than portability. When we had it in place, she stood back and looked at it and said, "Good." "It's heavy," I said. "It'll do," she said. It was the same voice she'd used when I told her the coffee was too strong, which it was, and she'd said it was good. She had a way of not romanticizing things, of taking them as they were and calling them sufficient. I'd been living alone in the mountains for 11 years, and I knew the value of that. It's rare. The morning I left, she was already at the school. I could see her through the window as I passed with the mule. She'd found a broom somewhere and was taking the summer's dust off the floor in long, deliberate strokes, her back to the window, and she didn't see me. I kept walking. I had 3 days of climbing ahead of me. I had traps to pull. I had a cabin that needed winterizing, and firewood still to split, and a dozen things that belonged to the life I'd been living for 11 years that were waiting for me without complaint. The mountain showed itself above the timberline just before dark, and I made camp at the base of the long switchback, with the mule picketed on a patch of dry grass, and a fire small enough that it didn't announce itself to the valley below. I sat with my back against a pine tree and my coffee cup in my hand, and I looked up the mountain at what I knew was up there. The cabin I'd built, and the trap line I'd run, and the silence that had been my whole life for longer than I could now say felt like enough. And I thought about the school at the east end of Millhaven, and the white clapboard and the bell tower that needed paint, and the woman who was going to be there on Monday teaching children who didn't know yet what they were being given. She'd said, "Come back," plain as that, the way she said everything. It was early November the first time I came back down. I told myself I was there for supplies. I bought flour and lamp oil and salt, the same as always. I walked past the school and she was inside, and there were children's voices coming through the wall, high and indistinct, the sound of a lesson in progress. I stood outside for a moment with my flour under my arm. Then I walked in. She was at the chalkboard with her back to the door. The students, 12 of them I counted, turned to look at me. She turned too. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Class, this is Mr. Cray, he knows the mountains." And to me, "Sit down, Josiah." I sat down on a bench in the back that was built for someone a foot shorter than me. The lesson resumed. Long division, it turned out. I stayed. That first winter I came down 4 times. Twice for genuine provisions, twice for reasons I didn't examine too closely. Sometime in January she told me she was extending her contract for a 2nd year. She said it without particular emphasis, just as information, and I received it as information, and neither of us made anything of it, and both of us understood what it meant. The last time I came down that winter, March, the snow still heavy in the high country but the valley roads clear and muddy. She met me at the hotel where I always left the mule, and she looked at me. And then she said plain, the way she said everything, "The school needs more books. There's a catalog I ordered from St. Louis that'll come to Calder's. Would you pick it up in April?" "Yes," I said. She nodded. "Good." She turned to go back to the school, then she turned back. "Josiah, I want you to know something." She paused, chose the words the way she chose her footing on the talus, each one placed with intention. "I've met many men, I taught alongside some. I was engaged to one once who had every qualification. And I know the difference between a man who can do things and a man who does things." She looked at me steady. "You do things. You went back down the mountain. You crossed the pass. You moved a bookcase and you picked up flour and you sat on a bench built for a child and you stayed." She held my eyes. "That's not nothing. That's not small." I stood in the muddy street with the mule beside me. "Nora," I said. "I'm not asking you to leave the mountain," she said. "I'm telling you the mountain is a long way from here and April is 6 weeks away, and I have come to find 6 weeks a long time." I thought about what I was going to say, and then I said something else. "I have a good east-facing window in the cabin." She looked at me for a long moment, then that small, real smile at the corners only. "I'll want to see it," she said. "April," I said. "April," she agreed. There are things I know now that I didn't know standing outside Calder's trading post with my list in my coat pocket, and the southbound stage already pulling away. I know that the right woman coming off the wrong coach at the wrong place at the wrong time is not always an accident, or if it is, it's the kind of accident you have enough sense to be grateful for. I know that going back down the mountain was the best decision I made in 11 years, and I know what it produced, and I know the weight of a woman's hands on my arms and the sound of her voice saying, "Come back, will stay with me until I'm under the ground," because it was the first time in a long time anyone had said anything to me that I wanted to carry. She stayed a second year, then a third. The cabin has an east-facing window and she has seen it, and she has seen the snow on the mountain and told me what she thinks about it, which is that it is beautiful and also impractical, and that a person would need a very good reason to live in it. I told her I had one now. She said, "That's a better answer than I expected." I said, "You had a low bar." She said, "I had a realistic one." The school bell tower got painted the second fall. White, the right white, the kind that catches the morning light. I painted it myself. She brought lunch up the ladder, which was not advisable, and she did it anyway, because that's who she is, practical and stubborn and quietly brave, and not inclined to watch a thing from the ground when she can be part of it. I took the lunch. I stayed up there longer than I needed to. Below me, the town went about its business. The mule was tied at the livery post and was, as usual, finding something in the dirt to eat. The mountains were north, blue and layered, present the way things that have always been there are present. And there was Nora on the ladder with her hand on the rail, looking up at me with the specific kind of patience she has always had with me. Not the impatient kind that's waiting to be done, but the real kind, the kind that has decided you're worth waiting for. A man can live without that. I had for a long time. I was very good at it. But I want to be clear about something, in case you're wondering why I'm telling you all this. I don't recommend it. The alone, the silence, the sufficiency. I was not better for it than I would have been with her. The day she stepped off that coach, I was exactly the man I'd always been, capable, careful, not afraid of much, used to doing what needed doing and not expecting anything for it. That hadn't changed. I was still all of that when she put her hands on my arms and said, "Come back." But something in how it felt to be those things changed. Because she saw it. Because she named it. Because she chose, the woman chose freely with her eyes open, knowing what she was choosing, and what she chose was this particular man, with his mule and his 2 strong coffee and his 11 years of silence and his east-facing window, and she found him worth coming back to. That's everything. For a man, that's everything. I painted the bell tower. I came back down the ladder. She handed me a biscuit, which she'd made herself that morning and wrapped in cloth to keep warm, and she looked at me with those careful, intelligent eyes that had been doing arithmetic on me since the first morning, and she said, "Looks good." I said, "Tower or biscuit?" She said, "Both." I ate the biscuit. The mountain was there. It's always there. The snow comes and goes, and the trap line runs, and the cabin stands with its east-facing window, and the spring comes up all at once the way it does when you've waited long enough. All of that is still there and always will be. But when I think about my life now, what it is, what it's become, I don't start with the mountain. I start with a woman stepping off the wrong coach at the wrong stop, and me walking over instead of walking away, and everything that followed from that one small decision being the most important thing I ever did. The bell tower looks good. She was right about that. She usually is.